Here's a Hexon rr700 that I did a rebuild on. This one has a 19T compressor wheel, so the compressor wheel is 46 or 46.5 by 58. I can't remember what size it is. It's either 46 or 46.5. The turbine wheel is a custom-made turbine, so I do have plenty of these available right now. And this turbo takes unique size bearings. The bearings are designed to work for the TD03 bearing housing, the factory bearing size, and then the turbine shaft is machined down to work with the custom bearing. So the internal of the journal bearing is not a common size. So if you do want to rebuild your Hexon rr700, you're going to need the journal bearings, and you also will need this thrust bearing. I had to have these made too. So the other thing is, if you need the shafts, I do have plenty of those right now because I had to place a minimum order to get that. The compressor wheels, those are easily accessible. You could probably find those online pretty cheap. I don't plan to start selling the compressor wheels because you guys could probably find those pretty easily. The compressor nut, you can see it's a bullet nut. I don't have those either, so you'll just have to use your original. If you need us to like do balancing for you to balance the assembly, we can do that. This Hexon is going to take the same rebuild kit as the rr550 video that I showed you, but there's actually several variations. So I think that one I did of the rr550 was actually an rr600. And then there is an rr550 that I did a rebuild after that, and that one was even different because it had different size journal bearings, different size collars and things. It's either that or it was an early variation. Now, so this rebuild kit for the rr700 is going to be the same that I did for the rr550 video, which I think were rr600s. So if you have the rr600 or 700, it will take this rebuild kit, but it's a very good possibility that it won't work for the rr550. You really need to pay attention to which turbo you had, watch the video, and understand the difference in them, because it's really important, because you don't want to buy the wrong parts for your turbo. I do have the correct bearings for the rr550 as well, but I don't have the collars or the shafts. I have the shafts for the rr600, but I have them listed for the rr550 because I wasn't really sure which was which, because they're not stamped on these turbos. So my main point is, if you need the rebuild kit, I'll link to that in the description box below, but I'm not going to do it today because it's New Year's and it's 3 in the morning right now, and I just don't feel like doing that. The other thing I need to explain to you is that if you do the upgrade rebuild kit, see it has TD04 collars, and I have those upgraded in size. Those are to make the turbo more durable, so you're not going to have problems like you had out of these turbos, or like you've seen where it has a thrust bearing failure. What you're going to have to do to make that work is the bearing housing is going to have to be machined just like I show you in this video. This one is your normal TD04 bearing. This one is a custom bearing that I had made. So this one is for the TD03 upgrade, but I'm able to take this and machine this out for the Hexon. So this will get bored out just a little bit to accept the TD04 collar rather than the TD03 one. So this is your TD04 upgraded collar, and this is your TD04 not upgraded collar. So this is the factory one. The reason the bearing housing has to be machined is because this diameter is bigger, and the bearing housing will interfere or be in the way of this diameter being bigger. That's why I machined that out just a little bit. This one, like I said, it's smaller, so you can't have a thrust bearing failure because of it being too small. It needs that more surface area, because that surface area being greater on here will prevent it from having a thrust bearing failure at higher boost applications. If you plan on running only like 15 pounds, you'll be okay with the factory collar, but it doesn't make sense to not do the upgraded collar, especially because the reason for these turbos being bigger is to make more horsepower. So if you want to get the full potential out of the turbos without having problems out of them, you need to go with the upgrade collar and the upgraded bearing. So in the rebuild kit that will list for this turbo, you will need this rebuild kit just for the Hexon, because the TD04 one is not going to work. See how the dowel pin is on this side versus this side? This is, like I said, the TD04, this is a TD03 one, and this one is the one you need for the Hexon. And then if you plan to use the upgrade collar, then you're going to need to machine the bearing housing just like I show in the video. Now if you had like the reverse motor, or like the BMW N20, it would use this style thrust bearing, but it would be bigger on the inside diameter here, which is what I'm going to have to machine out to for the TD04, or for the Hexon anyway. But see, the other thing about the reverse end from the N20 is that this pattern is different. See how it's lower here on this side, but on this side it's higher? That pattern is for the flow of the oil. So this turbo, it's going to spin like this way, and then if you had the pattern on the opposite side, the turbo should spin this way. So that's the difference in the reverse and forward rotation thrust bearings. The rr550s and 600s and the 700s, the reason why they have those names is because the 550s rate at 550 horsepower and the 600s at 600 horsepower and the 700s are rated at 700 horsepower. That was just in case you didn't know that. I mean, a lot of this information is getting lost because this company doesn't exist anymore, and there's nowhere to get replacement parts, so it has to be all custom made. If you need the parts for this, and I haven't put the link in the description box yet, you can email me at turbolabamerica@gmail.com. The last thing I need to mention is the rear seals on these are not like standard TD04. I think they were intended to be standard TD04, but for some reason, I guess after they heated up and been through their heat cycles, the TD04 seal does not fit in there correctly. So we've always had to gap the rear seals, and the gap is supposed to be 5 thousandths in between the two ends of the piston ring seal when compressed. So that was another concern with making a rebuild kit for these. So we will list in the rebuild kit description or notify you whether or not you have to gap the seals or whether we have already had that revised. As of the time shooting this, I don't have a solution besides us to gap them, which I don't have a spare Hexon bearing housing that can make the piston ring seals ready to go. So I'm thinking I'll just get measurements and then have that made. This compressor housing did have to be sleeved to be able to make this work because the compressor wheel is bigger than the inlet, the factory inlet size. They also put that bevel on there so your intakes won't fall off. When I go to do the rebuild on these, I also cut the back of the compressor housing where they didn't cut it fully for the exducer of the blade. That's another flaw that I see in these turbos, so I go back and correct all these problems. If you want us to just do the rebuild for you, that would probably make the most sense rather than having you buy the parts to build it. But if you want to buy the parts, that's okay too. But just be aware of the responsibility of you doing it correctly.